we want to do today is really share some work that we've been doing at the GFF, look at where we've applied it in one country, and discuss with all of you about its relevance for other work across the GFF and in World Bank projects more broadly. So that's where we're going to spend the next hour. We'll do a bit of a presentation and take you through the tool, and then have some time for discussion at the end. By way of introduction, my name is Alison Morgan. I'm a Senior Health Specialist at the Global Financing Facility and the Technical Lead for Maternal and Newborn Health here, and I've had the privilege of working across a number of country teams, and wanted to share where this work came, why we've sort of looked at this work, and where we think it might be applicable within the project work that we're all involved with. So just by way of introduction, the maternal and newborn space, we've realised that over the last, between 2016 and 2020, that the maternal mortality, stillbirth and neonatal mortality rates have all really stagnated since the end of the MDG era, even before COVID also really disrupted services. And there's a huge impact around providing quality care in that sort of period around antenatal care at the time of birth. And then what I want to focus on today is that postnatal period and the care of newborns, the clinical care of the small and sick newborns. Of the newborns that die, 70% of them are low birth weight. And often, and up until about 5-10 years ago, the care of newborns sort of stopped at essential newborn care about immediate breastfeeding and skin-to-skin contact, rather than looking at, well, some babies need a bit of additional support. In fact, maybe 15% of all births, the babies will need some additional support that can't be provided through what has traditionally been available. And the other piece in this is that nearly all the GFF supported countries, and about 106 countries, have signed on to the Every Newborn Action Plan. Those of you familiar with this know that the first ENAP plan was auspiced in 2014, was endorsed at the World Health Assembly, countries report against it, and in 2020, new targets for the 2020 to 2025 were set. And again, most of the countries with which we work have endorsed this action plan. And target 4, which is a new area, is that 80% of all countries have a national implementation plan that really looks at what newborns need, that clinical care. And in terms of the national or subnational target, 80% of districts, or whatever subnational unit is relevant in the countries with which you work, have at least one level 2 inpatient newborn care unit. So this is more than just basic essential care, it is support. And generally speaking, we talk about level 1, level 2 and level 3. And I'll share these slides later because there's no way you'll be able to read that. But level 2 is primarily around, some breathing supports. It might be oxygen with some continuous positive airway pressure, management of jaundice, management of sepsis, kangaroo mother care. And increasingly, the evidence for keeping a mother and a baby together throughout that secondary level care has huge mortality dividends. So countries committed to this, but because it was a relatively new area, most countries had no idea what it would take to do. So at the GFF, we were thinking, well, if we want to support countries to meet their Every Newborn Action Plan targets, we need to have an understanding of what that will take. What is it going to cost? The risk of not understanding that is that you get, and we've already seen this in a lot of settings, very ad hoc adaptations. Many of you have probably been in hospitals where a small room has suddenly been labelled the small and sick newborn care unit. and it may not have any of the requirements that would really be necessary to give the babies the care they need. So we have this challenge of understanding what's required to meet these targets and actually to achieve the newborn mortality reductions that we need to see and to accelerate before 2030. And trying to really understand what it takes. And then because it generates quite a big number, think about what do we do in terms of supporting countries to prioritise, where are you going to put these units, what size. So a lot of those questions there needed to be answered. So that's where we came up with the idea of understanding this. And so what we did, and I will introduce Eliana shortly, who will show you the tool, and she has led the development of this tool, is we basically built an Excel, it's a fairly straightforward Excel costing tool that tried to incorporate the guidance that existed. There aren't many countries that have done this. India has done it. Bangladesh has gone a long way to doing it. Sierra Leone has also been an advanced country in the provision of small and sick newborn care. So we drew on that experience. UNICEF has been really the thought leader in a lot of this work, looked at the WHO guidance, the UNICEF guidelines, and then the experience in other countries. And we commissioned a case study in Haryana, where the government had really led this process, because we want this to be government-led. And looking at how they did it, what challenges, lessons learned, what course correction they made as they tried to reach this ENAT target and provide care for small and sick babies. We then piloted this in Zambia late last year. So we looked at, Zambia has quite good guidelines. They've done the national adaptation of the UN standards. They then produced a set of guidelines of what equipment and what level of care should be provided at what facility. They did quite a bit of adaptation from a South African model, which is very good. And so having quite detailed guidelines was a very good starting point to really costing what that would look like. Now, as you would remember, I thought that this idea was we would then help countries understand what the resource requirements were to meet the ENAT target. And it very quickly changed when we were in Zambia to realise that's actually not helpful. It might be interesting for UNICEF and it might be interesting for WHO, but for a country, it just generates a very big, scary number that is very demotivating. But what was really helpful in Zambia is that within the COVID project that GFF was co-financing, and part of the co-financing was around essential services and trying to support the investment case that had been developed in Zambia, we had $1 million that was allocated to small and sick newborn care. And so it quickly became a much more relevant exercise of saying, this is our resource envelope. What can we do at quality for small and sick newborn care? I think there's always the risk that, with a certain sum of money, people are trying to address inequities by spreading that as far and as wide as possible. And I think particularly in this area, we have a real risk that if we pursue equity over quality, we risk providing equitable access to very low quality care. And so we really thought, well, if we want to do this, we want to do it properly from the get-go, because this is a new area that countries are investing in. And so then where is the most strategic place for this? Where is the highest burden? Where are most of the births happening? What would be the most strategic placement of limited resources? And so that's what we did in Zambia. And then following that experience, Eliana's developed a very detailed user manual, and both the manual and the tool were shared in the invitation. So I hope that if you want to have a play with that, you can do. So in terms of the approach, it was very much a step-by-step guide that didn't just say, oh, here's the equipment that we need, or here's the infrastructure size that we need, but looked at a more systems approach, that it had to address the human resources needs, what are the quality of care aspects that are required. The human resources had to extend beyond just doctors and nurses. And then we wanted to recognise that if you start a program like this, but your staff in the Ministry of Health is still your one person who's in charge of newborn care, for example, it puts a lot of additional work on the resourcing of that needs to be actually factored in. So we tried to encompass what that quality of care overlay would look like. So in terms of the actual operational steps, what we did in Zambia was we looked at the government policies and standards. We then looked at what were the required equipment pieces. We engaged a short-term consultant in the country to collect the local costing data, to source different prices of different equipment that were in the guidelines. Then that was entered into the tool. Then we had the country workshop that was led by the government, included WHO and UNICEF, and then looked at really validating the costings and the assumptions, recognising where some of the guidance, which we thought was really detailed, might need further work, and then looked at what was the best buy within the resource envelope. So I might hand over to Eliana at this point to take you through the four components of the tool.
Thank you, Alisa. Hello, everybody.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay, I am Eliana Jimenez, and I am a health economist, and I am a short-term consultant, and I was working with Alisa on broadcasting too. So, well, I know, we are so sick of Excel and PowerPoint that then, I want just to give, a few key messages that will be very important. So this one will be a quick overview, but before we do it, I want to emphasize that basically what we want is that the costing tool supports the planning discussions and the open and how it's going to be implemented. So probably most of you are familiar with the bike shelf effect. That's, that was in the 1950s, and they said, they did this study, and well, we usually spend much more time on very minor things, and the complex and difficult tasks are just too difficult, 2 minutes done. So this was, they said, if you have a team of experts discussing, they're going to put a nuclear plant and the bike shed for the office, most of the time will be spent on the bike shed, not on the nuclear plant. The nuclear plant is just too complicated. The bike shed, we can contribute, it's easy, etc. So that was the main principle behind the tool. I wanted the tool to facilitate the costings, that people shouldn't spend a lot of time on that, and just people should focus on what is needed to deliver quality of care. So all the parameters that we have in the tool are basically the minimum that you want to provide clear guidance to facilities. So I wanted to show this because Zambia had incredible standards, and because they were very detailed. So many people look at the standards and say, fine, the facilities are ready to run, they don't need more information. But actually, that wasn't the case. If we go, for example, and if you're a facility manager and you say you have to set up the unit, you want to know how many square meters do I need to set up this? The equipment, and we will see later in some of the slides, even though some of the requirements that they had in the guidelines were detailed enough. They were not detailed enough to ensure the right equipment was included, because, as you will see, the price differences were staggering. Like in some, we were talking about $20,000 for difference in one piece of equipment in the prices from two vendors. For other items, we have differences of 44. So we were like, wow. So that shows you, so that will have obviously a huge impact on budgets. Human resources, the guidelines don't have enough information to estimate the required staff ratios. So that will have a huge impact on quality of care and also on costs. And for quality of care, we had very limited information. Like, for example, there is no like a standardized training for all staff in the country. So basically, I wanted to keep that in mind because the tool basically does the emphasis that we have placed on the tool, and that's the emphasis in the country application, is basically on the specifics for the system parameters. And we all know that one of the problems we have is that we spend too much time planning and budgeting and too little time on implementation. So we also designed it in such a way that some of the system parameters, they can actually be used for developing facility operational guidelines. So they're like trying to reach that spot. So before we go to what was included in Zambia, I wanted you just to have a quick, just to show you now that we had a look. So how the tool is organized. So if you see here in information in the first slide, you will have all the components of the tool, etc. And you can just go and navigate, you go to general inputs. And we designed it in such a way that it's like a planning guide. So you have a step-by-step, you have descriptions of everything, the steps that people have to follow. And those steps are included not from the point of view of costing, but from the point of view, if you are thinking about setting up these facilities, what is that you need to think through? So first, for example, for infrastructure, you need to think about who are the people who need this, what is the population, what the population needs, and so you go step by step. Obviously, we won't have the time to do it now, but just to show you very quickly, so it goes step by step. And we also have review steps. So if people follow this step by step, they will be able to see what is driving costs, etc. So this is just a quick show you. And one of the most important things that we were paying attention, as we were saying, to facilitate your costings is that when you are looking at costing for a country, the first thing that you will find is that people will tell you, and that's absolutely true, all facilities in a country are different. You cannot just tell me that you have cost one facility and that applies across the whole country. But you cannot go and do detailed costings for each facility. That's not practical. So what we have included is basically these typologies here, that once you have entered the data, you can use these typologies to, the mix and match is huge because we have five typologies and up to 3 categories in each. So you have up to 100, more than 100 unique facility types for which you can obtain costings. So that facilitates basically, as we said, the costing exercise that you can go at the end and just do, here at the end, you play with this, you change, you can select different types of facilities, etc. And that can help inform a lot of the discussions. And to facilitate some of the stuff in the tool, we have included at the end this scale-up costing scenario. So here you can just go and basically, select the number of facilities that you want to, include in a country. So if I include, for example, 2 here, then you can see that, then it's added and the number changed. But what is important about this one that I wanted to show very quickly is this. That this is something usually ignored when you are planning for this type of facilities, and the tool explicitly makes that message clear. You have here the number of facilities that have been included. You saw like 15 in 2024, and then this. So all these costs are the recurring costs of the facilities that were already set up. So if you see here, you see the green are the recurring costs. So you will see how that is represented. So this one, it's a very important exercise, so that when you are costing and when you are planning to set up these facilities, you are clear. This is the capital investment, but these are the recurring costs, and that's very important for sustainability. So that's just very quickly going through what. Well, so now we go into a little bit more of how we did this in Zambia. So in Zambia, what we did was that we basically went. Where is that? So we had that included. What did we cost in Zambia? We costed 3 facility sizes. Location costs, we had, we used 3 so that this could represent, your urban, rural, and remote areas. But also you could use it to, as a sensitivity test for your costing results, because you don't want to give just one estimate, but a range that people must feel more comfortable with. Also, we included new versus rehabilitation for infrastructure, because the cost will be massively different. For example, when allocating the $1 million that Alison was talking about in Zambia, because the costs are so large, they said, actually, instead of setting up a new facility, then we're going to work on facilities that only need rehabilitation. So that's how it was used. Equipment, also to reflect that some facilities in the country will have some equipment, others will need all. Again, this was also used in Zambia when allocating that $1 million. They were like, if we're going to set up a new facility that needs new construction and all the equipment, we won't have enough money. It's better to basically work on facilities that have some equipment so that we can allocate those resources. And that's how we did it. Human resources in Zambia, we costed, the facility for facilities that have, that operate in urban areas, but also included those in rural areas where they need, the country has a 20% allowance to recruit and retain staff. We also included in service training, coaching, etc. Quality of care have also been included, and national average. So that's what we costed in Zambia, and as you can see, it's fairly comprehensive. So just wanted to show quickly some of the results we got and how we use them for inform the discussion. So for example, human resources, the costs in Zambia. So you can see here, the costs are fairly significant, and obviously, staff development is a very minor cost. So we have here for small, medium, and large facilities, and as expected, the largest share of costs is by numbers, because you have a significant number of nurses required and doctors who have higher salaries. So nurses account approximately in all these three facilities in 34 to 42%. But importantly, these other staff that they are usually ignored when you start planning for those facilities, they are almost like, like a quarter of what is required. So one of the issues with that, and I wanted to show you the impact because in many guidelines, when you start setting up this facility, people are like, they just think of the doctors and the nurses and ignore all the staff like biotechnicians, etc. So if you see, for example, so the question is, does it matter? Going back to the point of what is need, why the most important discussion is about the specifics of that guidance. So for human resources, in the guidelines in Zambia identify the required staff, such as doctors, nurses, and nutritionists, other staff, sorry, that's a typo. And then staff facility ratios are only included for nurses. And as I said, the support staff can be easily ignored. And the costing exercise can help to ground and inform those discussions because, as you will see here, you go to the next slide. You can go and check if you want, in the Excel, I will share this presentation. So this is what we are talking about in terms of costs, for example. 177,000 for a small and medium. And I wanted to emphasize that during the discussions in country, they were very clear, the stakeholders, that they needed the same number of staff for a small facility, for a facility of 9 beds than for a facility of 12 beds, which basically leads to the conclusion, why bother setting up a 9-bed facility when you need the same staff for a 12-bed facility, and that's the largest recurring costs. So that was, for example, an important insight from the discussions. So if you go, you can see, for example, those are the results you get. You can go and check in your tool if you want to. But then if you go, and then if you remove all those those staff members that are usually ignored when having those discussions, but that are critical for quality of care, your costs are substantially underestimated. We went from 280,000 plus to 178,000 roughly. So that's why it's, that's to show you the importance of basically being very clear about what is that the facility needs and having those discussions in country. So that's for human resources. I wanted to show you just, some of the other costs that we got in Zambia. And this is the same type of exercise that can be taken in any country. So you go and you check, the building costs. So for example, here we use the typologies, again, the size of the facilities and also the cost typologies, just to see the variations. And it was important also to have a look at costs per bed and also the total cost, because you can see, for example, here that there are important economies of scale in terms of the facility sizes. So that was an important discussion in country. And, I won't go into any of the details, but, these are some of the key cost drivers, the space per bed, and all those ones are the system requirements set in each country. So when we look, for example, equipment costs for that facility, this was, I think, for me, it was one of the most interesting parts of the exercise. As I said, we collected different prices from different vendors. and have a look at the impact on budgets. So for example, in a large facility, you go from 130,000 to $67,000. So have a look at the small facility, more than double. So that shows you, for example, and that delivers the message of you really need to have very detailed specifications when you go to tender. And then you can see that impact here. Other important thing is that only 6 items accounted for 50% of costs for each facility in terms of equipment. So this is also the type of thing that we were emphasizing, like when you are for your discussions, it's important also to highlight these items so that you pay more attention to these type of items that account for the bulk of the expenditure. And that was the same, for example, in the case study in India. So that's very typical. Also very important, the equipment acquisition is only the tip of the iceberg. And as Alison was saying, we have had that experience that, we go in country and we see the equipment, laying, idle, nothing. So it's very important to basically be able to account and to include in budgets equipment maintenance, consuming and renewables, spare parts. And also something that many people ignore is like you buy the equipment, but you need to distribute the equipment and install it at each hospital. So one of the challenges usually with these castings is that it's very hard to get actual data. For example, in the country, in Zambia, there was not one single facility operating at full capacity with all the standards. So with the discussion with the stakeholders, so we agreed on, some rules-based costing that can facilitate to come up with a resource envelope that is reasonable and that you can fine-tune later on during implementation, but this ensures that those costs are fully accounted for. So for example, in Zambia, this was based on UNICEF, basically helped us a lot with this, with the experience in Zambia and triangulated with colleagues in India, for example, for consumables and renewables. So think of that 30 to 40% of the equipment value, you will need to budget for that every year just for consumables and renewables, and 10 to 15% for equipment maintenance. So basically, it's like 50% of the equipment of whatever you are investing on equipment will be to be invested every year on consumables, renewables, and equipment maintenance. So that's why those recurring costs are so important. That was also very important for the discussions in country. So for quality of care, this is also something that usually falls through the cracks. So what we wanted was to basically make sure that all those components are included. And in Zambia, so many of those components were included, for example, to ensure that for referrals, you have transport, so that's included under equipment, or that you have the laptops and the staff and the space for continuous quality improvement. So all of that was mostly included. And this one, what Alison was mentioning for national and regional strategies, that it's a reminder menu to remember people. You need to have to at least think through what is needed for the high level oversight, for the financing, what do you need in terms of allocating, commissioning infrastructure and the equipment doesn't happen on its own. So you have to think through what you need to put in place for that to happen, etc. So all that, all that is detailed in the Zambia report, and we can go through that. So basically, this is what we came up in Zambia in terms of the cost of the national and regional strategies. So this number here is for $400,000 each year, basically to ensure that people, that we have nurses and doctors that are trained in neonatal care. So that's an annual cost that is quite significant. And that was, for example, one of the discussions during the workshops in country, what are the numbers that you need, etc. And that's what we included here. And these costs here basically are the initial costs to ensure that you have, as we said in the national regional strategies, you're commissioning the right equipment, the infrastructure, ensuring oversight, etc. Those costs obviously go down for the following years. And so these are the national and regional costs that usually are ignored, but we wanted to make sure they are included in the tool, so they are here. So just to sum up, the scary numbers that Alison was talking about. What is that we need? These are the results in Zambia. So you're looking, so here we look at, small, medium, and large facilities. So the green one, we have the capital costs, and this one, we have the capital costs per bed. So that's, as we saw, here we are costing new construction. So rehabilitation is approximately like 60% of the cost of new construction. So equipment, that's what we have costed here, major need at base prices. And human resources, they are the standard. We are not including here the hardship allowances for rural and remote areas. And location costs, we are using high cost. For example, that's the 600 cost per square meter of construction. So basically, that shows you first, as we said, we have significant costs, and the recurring costs cannot be underestimated. And the cost per bed, you can see the important economies of scale and why the 9 facility beds are definitely not, not a good investment, but important. That's why, that we remember that there are also other factors that have an impact on costs. So we have, like, if the facility needs new construction or rehabilitation, or if it's partially equipped or needs all essential equipment. And that is why we were able, because we had, as we said, only $1 million to allocate in Zambia. You would barely be able to afford the capital cost for a large facility. But that's why this led to the discussions in Zambia. Well, let's look at facilities that only need rehabilitation and some equipment. And well, you will have, this is what we discussed at the beginning, you have the tool analytics, those two, the facility typologies and the scale-up scenario to look at the recurring costs that can be used to support all the country discussions. And Alison, now over to you.
So we're just setting up, Fernanda's going to put up a poll quickly because we all just wanted to get a sense from people about the use case in the settings with which you work. So if you've got your phone handy, I'll just hand over to Fernanda to put that up.
Thank you, Alison. I just shared the link on the chat, and I'm gonna share my screen so we can go ahead and have it. All right, so you can use your phone to actually get into this poll and best share with us what would be a potential use case of this costing tool that Eliana just presented in the countries you support and in the work that you do. So for the people that are online, they can do that through the chat. And if you're connected as well, you can do that. So you just use your phone and we'll be able to gather some insights. Super. I see we have some responses.
No, this is great. Thank you. Just to help make sure we're sort of relevant or not, because often you can get in the weeds and then you think, oh, this is absolutely of no value. Nobody's been brave enough to tick the last one. That's very encouraging.
Do you think it's working?
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, thanks very much. We might switch back now.
Still going.
Oh, we're still getting some responses.
Yeah, we should just give it a minute.
Sure.
And for the people in the room, you can use your phones and just scan the code so you can vote
They
as well.
did.
Yeah, no,
It
we
worked
did.
very.
You're
So
fine.
I think if I think about the real lessons learned for Zambia, one was, you often only get one shot at doing country guidelines. And often we have guidelines as a performance-based condition within a World Bank project, and ensuring that they are specific enough to not give the room, you might have the specification of a radiant warmer, and perhaps in the Ministry of Finance, they think that's a bar heater on the wall costing about $10. And a neonatologist is imagining a radiant warmer over an incubator at a significantly different cost point. And the way to ensure that you get the product that you need is to have that guidance in place. So it was a real lesson in, even in a country like Zambia where the guidance looked very detailed, it still was insufficient to give the real quality, ensure that quality of care. That was the first really important learning for us. The second was that aha moment of realizing that the recurrent costs were significant, because I think we often just have this unconscious assumption that the setup costs, that's the big investment, and then the ongoing costs will be less. And without budgeting those recurrent costs, I think there is the risk that you have an equipment graveyard or you have an unstaffed but built facility. And then the third sort of takeaway from the Zambia experience was very much around the fact that the tools are just tools, but the generation of the discussion that arose as a result of doing this exercise was of enormous value. So we had all the right people in the room for that validation exercise, and it really it brought up some of those service delivery.
When you say right people, can you elaborate?
Oh, okay, so it was led by the Ministry of Health. They were chairing the meeting, so it was the senior neonatologist from the Ministry of Health and some other staff from the Ministry of Health. We had neonatologists from there aren't actually that many neonatologists in Zambia, but from the Neonatology Association, we had 2 neonatologists present. We had some neonatal nurses. We had UNICEF and WHO, and then some facility in charges from government facilities.
That's why the discussions were so robust. Because you had the nurses were like, no, you cannot deliver good quality of care with those numbers.
Yeah, it was, and then it was encouraging. We got a lot of pushback. The evidence now is that if you have immediate KMC, so that even for the sicker babies, that you have them with the mother. So this idea of not separating the mother and the baby, even in a high dependency neonatal unit, has significant space implications. If you're having the mother with the baby in a high dependency unit, the level 2 nursery, the clinical unit, rather than having just a row of 6 baby beds. And there was a lot of pushback then on it, so it made everybody really test some of those. It generated quite a lot of discussion. And then the final point was really around I think the starting point, which is probably guided by this ENAC guideline, is that we have a small facility, a 9-bed facility in 80% of our district hospitals, and then realising that that is a really inefficient way, that in Zambia, where districts are a certain, they're about 150,000 population, it doesn't make sense. It would be better to have fewer facilities at the provincial and sub-provincial level. And so within that resource envelope, they picked 2 high-burden provincial hospitals and then a facility within the main Lusaka province that was feeding into the main tertiary hospital, but had quite a high burden of births. Fernanda, if you stop sharing, I'll just finish off with these last few slides and then we'll have some time for discussion. Thank you. So we wanted to share this just to say this is available, and the lessons we learned, I think we've said this, I won't go into this, but it really did generate that idea of generating what the gaps are in country standards and guidelines, and then looking at what it contributed. I think, as we said, it did a lot of interesting quality of care discussions around health planning. I think it links to service delivery redesign work, because you have to start thinking about where's the appropriate level of care, how do we then ensure babies are able to, families can access that care. In terms of next steps, we are looking at working in a couple of other GFF supported countries where this fits with the country projects, specifically in Ghana and in Liberia, but we'd be open if it was of interest in the countries where you're working. The UN are updating their implementation guidance, and potentially the next step would be to take this Excel tool and put it on a web-based application that would then ultimately become their UN linked to the UN guidance. We had a meeting yesterday with USAID and their implementing partners who are interested in taking this up. And I think for the implementers, where it, I think, has value is that instead of being a facility by facility, let's do this, it tries to really get that national perspective. Even if in the end you can only do select facilities, you're doing it in the context of a national program. So I'll finish there, and love to have any feedback or questions or discussion or next steps from people either online or in the room. Thank you for spending your lunchtime with us.
Maybe I will start.
Yes, Sean, thanks.
Just to say that this tool is really powerful, I think, for implementation. Because as we know that many countries, they used to use the One Health tools to just generate some figures that are not realistic. But this one, it's have like details, very useful. So my question was, at which extent this can be adapted for other services? Because it's really hard for a country just to have well-costed services for the the newborn, and then not for other services, and then it can be even hard to implement. So to which extent this can be adapted for other components in maternal and child health. And then the accompaniment, so the capacity building at all level, I think it's something that is needed. I don't know if it's we can also help country to cost these capacity building to use these tools. And finally, the M&E part, because one is really budgeting and planning, and then the other is really to make sure that implementation is really happening, and if there is some feedback on a regular basis, so that we can make sure that the quality we are seeking is really.
You asked the hard question. We've got a couple of questions online, so we might take a few and then respond. So I think JP, you're first, and then Amir. Thanks.
Okay, thank you both. This has been a great presentation, and I'm really impressed with how thoughtful you have been about both the capital and the recurrent costs, including the staffing. I don't think I've seen this level of detail or attention in many other exercises. One question I did have about the recurrent costs is, does that include some depreciation of your capital investment? And have you been able to sort of look over time at the cost in the context of the benefits that you're expecting to accrue from these types of investments? So I guess that's a two-part question. Does it include depreciation of the capital investment? You know, knowing that we're going to have to continue to maintain and rehabilitate and possibly replace facilities. And number two, you know, are we prepared with this data to start moving towards an estimate of what the cost benefit ratio is, or the cost effectiveness ratio, in terms of neonatal or deaths averted? Over.
Right. And Amir?
Thank you, both. I want to echo both John and JP about nice presentation. And I think the level of detail that this tool will help to the country to get, and all donors can participate, is really helpful. And I really like the bike shed effect. I think that picture is spot on. I think I was thinking a lot of things that's past, like the nuclear plant and the bike shed. You know, in many countries, when it's about building tertiary hospital, it's just like a nuclear plant. Just everyone just sign in without any problem. When it comes to quality parts of services, whether like, you know, it's HR or recurrent services, that's everyone says, like, you know, panicked and spend a lot of time after investments of billions of monies on different currencies. And, you know, the major recurrent one is the ones that, you know, every countries are struggling, and vice versa. So I think that's spot on, and this tool really helped a lot to bring that to surface to the discussion. So my question, I have a few questions. The first question that I have is, I think it's very important that this thing is not working in silos. I know that, Alison, you mentioned in your presentation that through country leadership that can help us to minimize working in silos, but I don't think that's enough, right? That's not enough just to say that country leadership make it not working in silos, because there's also different silos within the government, right? You know, one director might lead this process without involving the whole like, you know, people working at the government, and other directors might use, or other department might use other tools. So how these tools can work with all other tools to give more depth kinds of analysis, instead of trying to compete with other tools. You know, one of the tools, as Ron mentioned, that's one of the tools that has its own benefit, but also have a challenge with, and there's a limitation. So how these tools can work with other tools might just my first question. And my second question is about, if we want to use this tool, I wanted like some of your experience in Zambia. I think the master facility list is needed to really understand both the existing facilities, because, you know, there might be something in these existing facilities that doesn't need resources. You know, there might be something that might just needs maintenance. There might be something that needs only upgrading. So I think the master facility list is very important, because like my concern is, if we are planning to do this tool assessment without master facility list, there is a high chance people might select health facilities that might also, like, you know, make inequalities more wide, because there might be easily selected some facilities that might be easy to do, and then that might end up without value add, and might add another inequalities level, or we might select facilities that have nothing and spend a lot of money instead of using some limited resources to provide multiple services in multiple facilities. So I think with multiple dimensions, the master facility list is very important. So I just want to understand how this is done in Zambia. That's my second question. My third question is about this consumables, recurrent cost, and renewables. And I think that's amazing, like 30 to 50% of all equipment costs are end up with these renewables and some maintenance and things like that. So I think that's really great that you captured that. And are we also capturing drugs as a supply? Because I think most of the time, equipment can be captured with maintenance, lab equipment captured with the reagents and others, but the drug is one of the major difficulties, challenges, especially to provide neonatal care, high quality care. I think there is a lot of stockouts all over the countries when it comes to specific to neonatal care. So is this system will capture also the drug is my other question. I have a few other questions, but I just want to directly go to maybe to the next steps. When you talk about, Alison, the next step is to see other countries, other projects. I think that's good, but I think my suggestion is instead of for us to become opportunistic, it's very important for us to become systematic. Since now, Alison, we are planning to do this quick assessment in all GFF countries to really understand the RMN-CHA landscape, I think it might be important to use that data to see which countries make sense to do that. For me, I think we can do this in every country depending on our bandwidth, because in some countries, they might need as full package. In some countries, they might need some parts of this package because they already have some data on others. So that might be important instead of using the opportunistic way of asking Focal Point or others to do this. It's very important for us to have the basics understanding in each country and to select countries based on that. I'll stop here.
Thanks, Amir. I might just take last questions from Marty and then we'll do some answering. Thank you.
We have questions.
Oh, sorry. And then go to the room. Oh, then we'll answer and then get some questions. So over to you, Marty.
Thank you. Thanks for the interesting presentation, and it's great too. Indeed, there was a lot of details and look into usually discarded and ignored items. Just reflecting on the tool and how we can use it. We are involved at KIT with one project with World Bank and GFF to redesign the service redesign for human-centered approaches in few countries. And I am involved with, my task would be more about the cost effectiveness part. And I'm trying to reflect on it because when we're talking about human-centered approaches, big part of the cost that is usually the approaches try to reduce is on the social capital side, not the health service side. I see that the two mostly focus on the health system perspective and the cost of the health system, but also do you think there is a space also to take into consideration the social costs, like the time spent by the patients or their family members, missed work or and so on, or missed working capacity, productivity, and all of that into account in the costing for the services. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take some questions and then I'll hand it to us. With regard to expanding this to others, I think because this level 2 newborn care is a relatively new area, that was why we thought it warranted some focused attention. What we're seeing in some facilities is that people are clearing out a sluice room and putting in, in one I saw recently had a fan and a heater and a bowl of water as the humidifier for the room. It was this very creative and innovative way to address the lack of equipment. But this sense that because this isn't something that has been in place for a while, that countries are sort of really grappling with what does this look like. We want to try and get ahead of the game to say, well, if we're if we're starting something new, let's do it properly. We've known for 10 years that respectful maternity care reduces maternal deaths, but facilities still have 8 women birthing in a room with maybe a curtain between them that won't allow a birth companion, that won't allow respectful maternity care to be delivered, because we've got that sort of path dependent of having had this is our maternity ward, and it's been like that for ages, and it isn't seen as a priority. So because the newborn level 2 care was something new, it was an opportunity to say, let's do this properly. So I agree that having detailed costing for one area is a bit unhelpful, but I just think in this it's not like this would then be the you would assume the government would then take this into their own budgeting processes, but at least they're capturing all of the components. You could expand it and do it for maternal health potentially, but we had really tried to address the fact that this is new. It's something that countries are committed to scaling up, and then if we don't support that to be done properly from the get-go, then we risk making the same mistakes we've made, I think, in maternal health. The capacity building for doing this, I think we've all had the experience where it's not a good use of the Ministry of Health time to be playing on an Excel sheet, that we need to, provide that TA so that they can focus on the strategic decision and thinking that they need to lead with. So we've had an internal peer review with a couple of people just picking it up and seeing how easy it is to use. And I think that because of it's fairly self-explanatory and there is detailed guidance, if you've got a basic understanding of Excel, you could take and run with this. What you do need to have is the support to link it to those strategic discussions, I think. We're thinking of perhaps if there is interest, if it is a strategic effort to look at this in a number of countries, to just have a few people that are confident in using this that could then support the newborn care units within the Ministries of Health. In terms of, a couple of people mentioned the cost benefit analysis. We have, this as this is rolled out, I guess it lends itself to that. We do have some initial studies that have looked at this. We know that this, like ICANC, reduces neonatal deaths by 25%. And so we could do some very rough costings from that. I think we really need to see this where it's being implemented. Nest 360, which is a large consortium of groups that are working in 4 countries, have done this. They've done it in Tanzania, and they came up with a figure about costs per life saved. And with Enlist, you can model that. So you could do that with Enlist, just with the scale up of these services. List to date hasn't had all of the detailed interventions of level 2 incorporated in it, so it's been hard to do that to date, but that is in process. Others are doing that. Do you want to answer some of the other questions?
Yes. Okay, well, just to add, because that's related also to the cost effectiveness question, linked also to the benefits. When we were working on the tool, one of the key questions was, what was this for? Was it mainly to inform the budgeting or to inform an economic analysis for advocacy, etc.? So, for example, all the costs that we are asking in the tool, we are telling people just the costs, market prices for equipment, whatever the government will be buying. So, for example, we are not taking into account, as you do when you do the economic analysis, that we take into account subsidies and taxes, etc. So we in the manual made it very clear, if you want to use this for economic analysis, for that type of economic analysis, you need to do some further analysis. So we made that decision early on. And it was also driven by the fact that we wanted, to make sure that the tool didn't get too complicated for people. So that's, and the benefits, as Alison said, if you take into account all those issues to adjust the costings, then you can basically use the list tool to estimate benefits, bearing in mind that all those estimates in list are actually assuming you are delivering very good quality of care, there are no implementation gaps, etc. So that's one of the things. The use for monitoring and evaluation, we agree, and that's something we thought through. And as we noted in the Zambia report, basically the way it was designed, it was also like making explicit the theory of change behind the implementation. Because it says, okay, so this is the list of things you need, etc. So it could be basically very well, very easily used to inform your monitoring and evaluation, because you can go and say, did you set up this facility and hire all the staff, all the equipment? Did the government, for example, these were the quality of care strategies. So that was one of the reasons why things are so explicit in the tool. So they could be easily used for monitoring and evaluation. In terms of depreciation, no. And that's probably something we can consider to include. One of the reasons was because at the beginning we were thinking, what is the time frame to think through for the budgeting? And so we were thinking 3 years. But I think that's a very good point, because as you have said, it's not only the impact of the recurring costs, but the government needs to think through if we need to replace the equipment, etc. So that's something probably that we need to consider to include. And in terms of working with other tools, I fully agree. And I think one of the problems in countries is like, you have so many tools and different things, etc. So one of the things that I think the advantage of this one has in terms of being able to work with other tools is because everything, I wanted something that was fully transparent, that it's very clear, this is included, this is not included. So because you have that very clear, so for example, if someone else is costing maternal health or hospitals, something, you can basically see very clearly in this exercise what is included, what is not, and whether to avoid any double counting. It depends, of course, also if the others, have also been very explicit on that. Drugs, yes, we included the cost of drugs. So we were, to facilitate that, we are including the cost per newborn admission. So that's what is included in the tool. And in terms of individual facilities, having the master list, okay. So basically, how this might work is that because you have all the typologies. So basically, if you have the list of facilities, you could actually match and see which ones match with which facility. Actually, we did that work, and it's hidden in the Word file, because we thought, oh, people will see this and we go, what? too much, where we basically, I think I haven't removed it yet because we thought probably it might be useful in the country and we wanted to see in Ghana, where basically you could enter some of the basic characteristics of your facilities and then automatically then we'll assign costs based on typologies. And I also included like a prioritization algorithm where people can go and decide how do we prioritize facilities. And so the tool automatically would allocate resources to those facilities. So that's something that we think in a country is needed. That's already built, but it's hidden. So that's something that we could use if in a facility, if in a country that's needed. And I think we covered.
Yeah, the social costs.
That's include the social costs is included in the cost effectiveness. That basically, for the cost effectiveness, we are only because it's for the budgeting. We are not including. It's only for budgeting. We are not including any of the costs from the perspective of society, and that's why I was saying we are. Costing even equipment is costed is at market prices and not after accounting for taxes, etc. So none of that is included. Of course, if you use this and you want to take it a step further and you make those adjustments, that could be, easily included because it will be, but that will be an add-on exercise.
We've got some questions in the room. Thanks.
Thank you. So I guess my question is also in terms of the adaptability of the tool. So in a lot of the countries, we support also results-based financing, RBF, which allows for decentralization in terms of planning and budgeting of health facilities. So it's sort of like a mixed system where like large costs like salaries provided by central, but then also the facility also has finances to be able to provide some of these. So how the tool can be adapted to that kind of context.
Can I ask my other question before it is? Thank you. It's super helpful and sounds like a lot of work. So thank you for doing that. I have two questions and a suggestion. One, Alison, I'd be very keen to hear what is your thinking about when this tool would be best used in view of prioritization as part of an investment case and taking into account the points I think Amir raised about the equity and so on. How would we propose that we use the tool? I think that would be super helpful to think through a little bit. Like, should it come before the investment case is finalized so you know what to prioritize, or what are your thoughts on that? That would be helpful. And then secondly, I don't know, Sneha doesn't seem to be on the call, but the point on the maintenance really made me think about, we've supported this managed maintenance equipment program in Kenya with, I think, Philips or something, like there are these different type of managed equipment schemes. Have you guys thought about that? Because that probably, one thing is the costs now and seeing it, but they never budget for it and we know it's needed and so on. So is that something to think about as you're on this work? And then my third point is, I think the word costing tool maybe downplays the usefulness of this. So I think you need to think about whether it's feasibility and costing tool or something, because I think you're talking really about, scale up how to think it through, right? And I think if you're costing, you're only going to get your financial people. So think about how to come up with a better name. And I definitely also think there should be a GFF logo on there, because we often get asked, oh, what's the GFF doing? This is, I can see this is going to play a role. So let's put the GFF logo on it, that we sort of, with whoever else was involved. But then I think just from I'm hearing Bruno here in my ear. And then the last point is related to some of the lessons I think you highlighted, like, the maintenance and so on. Sharing those upfront, I think, are super helpful to get people more interested in the costing exercise. Because when you start with the Excel, you sort of get a little, but what did you learn and why is it important to do this exercise, which I think is why it got me thinking about changing the name.
Thank you. I don't think there are any other questions on. Within RBF, I was thinking around some of the, going through a whole sort of project within a DLI. When you have a whole lot of steps, you might have, getting your guidelines right, or ensuring the facilities are matching the guidelines, and that is the scale up. And then within RBF programs, I think it would depend on what the maturity of the country is doing. So if the RBF is on meeting certain newborn care, that triggers the payment, then this could be really useful for a district or a facility to sort of plan what they need to achieve that. And again, if it's a more broader or a direct facility financing, then I guess this is an unidentified need. I mean, I think this was all meeting the country's demand and needs in this case. So I think that, I think it could easily be used within an RBF program in a range of different ways, potentially. And broader when it can be used in the cycle. The 22 of our GFF countries were country delegations at the IMNHC conference recently in Cape Town. At the end of that conference, they had a delegates day where they prioritised over the next 2 years what are their real burning maternal and newborn health issues. And quite a few countries identified the care of small and sick newborn care. To me, that's the first step, saying, well, is this a country identified priority or not? And then if it is, then this is a way to support that being done at quality. I think within the IC, there would be, I think this could be an opportunity, it might be something the country platform reviews as again, if we're thinking of a living IC, that it might be, has this been, given the recent evidence, the recent evidence around maternal newborn health, has a country revisited where it positions newborn care in their IC or not? And if that triggers some thought of, maybe that is an area that we need to look into a bit more carefully, then this might be of value for them. And similarly, if a country is starting an IC process, I think that it could then really help in that, matching the resources available to what the investment would require. I think, we don't want to put people off by saying, this is the only standard. I think it is really about triggering some of these discussions so that you don't default to the fact that it's easy to buy equipment, and so there's equipment parked in all these facilities that is not functional. So it's really, using that tool, and I think that's a great suggestion to change the name, because we do want it to go beyond just the costing to getting some of this real systems thinking around quality to be there. In dissemination and sharing, we've got a few things in play, and I think that if it does eventually become the link to the UN guidance, then it we have delivered a global public health good. Any other questions or thoughts? I want to thank everybody for your time. I know getting into the nitty-gritty of an Excel sheet is the least easy thing to do, but I appreciate everyone attending and your valuable questions. And we will.
Thank you very much, everyone.